At 88, Dustin Hoffman is a living legend, an icon whose name still resonates with power, precision, and passion. From The Graduate to Rain Man, he carved out performances that didn't just entertain, they transformed the audience. But as the years have passed, the man behind the brilliance has faded from the spotlight, and what's left is a deeply emotional and painfully human story few ever expected. Beneath the accolades and standing ovations, Hoffman's journey has been filled with turmoil, fractured relationships, silent regrets, public controversies, and now, the cruel loneliness that often haunts even the greatest stars. He once stood shoulder to shoulder with the giants of Hollywood, and now he stands mostly alone, battling the weight of time, memory, and legacy. Despite the fame, despite the awards, and despite the global recognition, Dustin's later years have unfolded far from the cameras. What fans assumed was retirement has, in truth, been a slow retreat into isolation, a deliberate withdrawal from a world that once celebrated him, but now barely whispers his name. And behind that silence lies heartbreak, an invisible thread of pain that runs through each chapter of his extraordinary life. This is not just a story of a man who once ruled the screen. It's the tragic truth of how greatness can sometimes come at a cost too high to bear. As we look deeper, what we uncover isn't just a fading star. It's a haunting reminder that even the brightest lights eventually flicker in the shadows. Dustin Hoffman wasn't supposed to be a star. He didn't have the looks, the charisma, or the charm that Hollywood typically embraced. But what he had was something far more powerful, an almost terrifying dedication to his craft. From the start, acting wasn't just a job for Dustin, it was an identity, a shield, a mission. He studied endlessly, lived within his characters, and obsessed over every movement and word. When The Graduate turned him into a reluctant leading man, he didn't bask in the fame. Instead, he doubled down, terrified he'd be exposed as a fraud. That fear never left him. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Hoffman delivered performances that redefined the art form. In Kramer vs. Kramer, he wasn't just acting, he was tearing his own wounds open on screen. But behind the scenes, that same intensity isolated him. Directors called him difficult. Co-stars called him controlling. Friends described him as brilliant but emotionally unreachable. His refusal to compromise, his need for absolute truth in every scene, often came at the cost of relationships, peace, and even his own mental health. The pressure Hoffman put on himself was relentless. Every role had to be better than the last. Every mistake haunted him. And though the awards kept coming, they never seemed to satisfy him. He once admitted that after every performance, he only saw what he did wrong. No praise could quiet that voice inside him, telling him he could have done more, been better, been perfect. And perhaps that's the most heartbreaking part. Hoffman didn't just battle critics, he was at war with himself. The same drive that made him a legend also pushed him to the edge, leaving behind a trail of emotional wreckage few ever saw. As Dustin Hoffman's career soared, his personal life quietly deteriorated behind the curtain of Hollywood glamour. Fame, as powerful as it is, doesn't come without sacrifice, and in Hoffman's case, that sacrifice was felt most deeply in his closest relationships. His first marriage to Anne Byrne, though filled with early love and the promise of a life built together, couldn't survive the pressures of his rising stardom. Hoffman was rarely home, consumed by scripts, rehearsals, and the impossible standards he placed on himself. Even when he was physically present, emotionally, he often wasn't. Anne once confessed in an interview that being married to Dustin was like being married to a ghost who showed up in character. Though their daughter Jenna tried to bridge the growing distance, the emotional divide proved too wide. The divorce was quiet but devastating, especially for a man who prided himself on portraying deep emotional truth on screen while struggling to offer it in real life. His second marriage to Lisa Gott-Sagan brought more stability. Together, they had 4 children and created the image of a tight-knit family. But insiders say Hoffman often disappeared into work for months at a time, leaving Lisa to carry the emotional and logistical weight of raising a family nearly on her own. Then came the allegations that would rock his legacy. In 2017, as the Me Too movement swept through Hollywood, multiple women accused Hoffman of inappropriate behavior during the peak of his career. Though he denied the allegations and many of his supporters stood by him, The impact was undeniable. Hoffman, once seen as the introspective and sensitive artist, suddenly faced a public reckoning that he wasn't prepared for. The press hounded him, industry friends fell silent, and the actor, who once relished the challenge of tackling complex, broken characters, found himself portrayed as one. The controversy was deeply painful, not only because of the accusations themselves, but because of what they did to his legacy. Younger audiences who had never grown up with Tootsie or Midnight Cowboy now only recognized Hoffman's name in headlines of scandal. His career ground to a halt, scripts stopped coming, and in the rare moments he stepped out in public, there was an undeniable air of tension, a discomfort that lingered in the silence between what was said and what wasn't. For someone who had built his entire career on earning respect and admiration, not just from audiences, but from peers, this was more than just a PR crisis. It was a collapse of identity. Friends described him as shattered during that time, retreating almost entirely from the public eye. The same man who had once walked proudly across red carpets and Academy stages now avoided even small gatherings, haunted by the idea that he might no longer be remembered for his genius, but for his fall from grace. It wasn't just a professional tragedy, it was personal. Hoffman had always been his own harshest critic, but now, the world seemed to echo back the very doubts he had spent a lifetime wrestling with. And in that echo, something inside him grew silent. Perhaps for good. In the twilight of Dustin Hoffman's career, the silence became deafening. Once a staple of the silver screen, a fixture on talk shows, and a frequent subject of film retrospectives, Hoffman slowly began to vanish from public view. For years, fans assumed it was retirement, that he had finally chosen peace after decades of pushing himself beyond human limits. But those close to him knew the truth was far more somber. The roles hadn't just stopped because he was done acting. They had stopped because Hollywood had quietly turned away. The industry that once revered him as a genius now viewed him as a relic, complicated, controversial, and aging in a world obsessed with youth. Offers became rare. Invitations to festivals, panels, and premieres began to dry up. He was no longer the draw he once was. Even when Hoffman appeared in small, independent roles in the late 2010s and early 2020s, the buzz was muted. Critics gave respectful nods, but the enthusiasm that once surrounded his name had vanished. Friends say that he noticed the shift, that he felt it deeply. A man who lived and breathed recognition, who found purpose through performance, now faced a world that barely remembered what made him great. Health issues added another layer to the growing isolation. In 2013, reports surfaced that Hoffman had undergone treatment for cancer. Though his team insisted it was successfully treated, the experience rattled him. He withdrew further, choosing not to speak publicly about his condition. Always a private man, he feared being seen as vulnerable. For an actor who had built a career on revealing emotional truth, the irony was painful. He now spent his days hiding from the very attention he once thrived on. His home life offered some solace, but even there, distance lingered. His children, now grown with lives of their own, saw their father less and less. While they spoke of him with love, they admitted that he often seemed locked in thought, lost in memories of the past, or perhaps in regret. Those who visited Hoffman described a man still sharp and witty, but noticeably quieter. No longer the intense artist commanding the room, he had become a man observing the world from the shadows. Neighbors say he takes long walks alone. He paints in silence. He rereads the classics. But he doesn't talk about acting much anymore. And when the subject comes up, there's a sense of melancholy, like he's mourning a part of himself that's never coming back. The man who once transformed into Ratso Rizzo, Raymond Babbitt, and Captain Hook, who once made entire generations laugh, cry, and think, now fades quietly behind a curtain few dare to pull back. In many ways, Dustin Hoffman didn't just outlive his fame. He outlived the version of himself that the world adored. And that may be the deepest heartbreak of all. Not that his story ended in scandal or disgrace, but that it's ending in near silence. Not with a bang, not with a standing ovation, but with the slow, steady sound of a door quietly closing on one of the greatest careers Hollywood has ever seen. Dustin Hoffman's story doesn't feel like it has a clear ending. It feels suspended between greatness and grief, between applause and absence. For a man whose life was defined by characters, scripts, and scenes, the final act of his journey has been eerily quiet. There's no grand farewell tour, no Academy tribute or star-studded celebration. Instead, there's a quiet house, fading phone calls, and a man left alone with his memories, some treasured, some tormenting. Hoffman has often spoken about legacy in the past, not with pride, but with uncertainty. He never believed he had done enough, never felt the adulation fully reached the void he carried inside. And now, as the world moves on, it's that legacy, shining yet scarred, that haunts him most. There's no question that Dustin Hoffman changed acting forever. He redefined what a leading man could be. He made vulnerability powerful, awkwardness magnetic, and brokenness beautiful. But when the lights go down, what remains? Those who know him say he grapples with that question more and more. He thinks about the roles he turned down, the apologies he never gave, the bridges he burned in the name of art, and perhaps most painfully, the years of fatherhood that passed in a blur while he chased perfection on screen. The accolades mean little now. The awards gather dust. What lingers instead are the missed moments, the what-ifs, and the reality that time is running out to make amends. Still, he remains fiercely protective of his past. He avoids interviews. He doesn't engage with social media, and when asked about his life's regrets, he often changes the subject, offering a joke or anecdote instead. But those who've sat with him in recent years say the regret is there. It hangs in the room like an unspoken line in a forgotten scene. He knows he gave the world brilliance, but he also knows what it cost, and that no standing ovation can truly repay it. Occasionally, a fan will spot him, walking alone, sitting quietly in a cafe. They might recognize the eyes, the expression, the unmistakable presence. But most don't approach. The legend is still there, yes, but the man seems far away, lost in a lifetime of thoughts he no longer shares. He never wanted to be a celebrity. He wanted to be an actor. But even that identity now feels distant, like a costume that no longer fits. And so, the tragedy of Dustin Hoffman is not that he failed. It's that he succeeded, and still found himself hollow. That after decades of becoming everyone else, he never quite figured out how to be himself. The performances will live forever. The legacy is secure. But the man behind the roles, he remains an enigma. One of the greatest actors who ever lived, left to navigate a quiet ending in a world that's already moved on. Not with fanfare, not with scandal, but with the soft, slow sorrow of time. And perhaps that's the most heartbreaking part of all.